Hello, I'm Joshua Farnsworth and welcome to my traditional woodworking school here in Earlysville, Virginia. And in this video, I'm going to show you how I sharpen card scrapers. We use a lot of card scrapers here in the school. There's a lot of methods, a lot of tutorials out there, but none that I've found that work as fast or as well as this method. So let's get started. The first thing to think about when sharpening card scrapers is to make sure that you have all the right tools. First off is the card scraper itself. There's different thicknesses. Some people like the really hard, rigid card scrapers like this. I find them kind of hard on the hands, but they work in certain situations. Some people like these more flexible ones that are really good, especially if you're doing curves. Of course, you've got a French curve style here, but we'll talk about that another time. We're going to just be dealing with these rectangular styles. Another thing to have is a file, like this special mill file, and if you can, have a file jointer here, which I use for sharpening my saws as well. You can see this holds it in here. And the next tool that you need is a burnisher. You can also get away with the shaft of a router bit or shaft of a drill bit, hardened steel. Don't use screwdrivers because they won't actually work to burnish the cards. And finally you need some honing stones. I prefer to have a few different grits. I like to have a 1,000 grit water stone, a 4,000 grit water stone, and an 8,000 grit water stone. You can do it with oil stones, which I have oil stones, I like them, but I don't prefer it for sharpening card scrapers because it can get a little too oily, and it's just not very easy to sharpen the card scrapers with that. I'll share links in the description below the video to all these tools and all the card scrapers where I got them and the models, and then let's get started on the next step. The next step is to actually test the card scraper on all four edges to see if it actually needs to be sharpened. So let me show you a side that probably needs to be sharpened. You can see it is taking some shavings. It's better than nothing. But let me show you what good shavings look like. On this side, you can see how the burr is actually creating shavings like those from a hand plane. So that's what you would do on all four sides. You'd flip it over and test the other sides too. Because there's like a burr or a hook on all four edges of the card scraper. The next step before preparing the edges of a card scraper is to check and see if you've got maybe another turning of the burr that you can do before you have to go back and prepare all the edges again. And so what I do is I just put the card scraper just overhanging a little bit over the edge of a workbench top or a piece of wood. And I use the burnisher here, and I hold this card scraper, and I'll put the rod here at about 90 degrees, and then I'll just tilt it back a couple degrees. And then I'm going to push in to try and roll a burr over there. And then this is one thing I do that I don't think I've seen other people do, is I actually try to go by feel. And I actually will feel and see if I can find a burr. Now, if you just can't get that to happen, that means that your burr is just broken off. You're going to have to go back and prepare it. But usually you get 2 or 3 tune-ups every time before you have to go back and actually resharpen. So then I would just test this. Yep, I'm not getting much out of it at all. So we'll come back to the turning a burr part in a little bit in one of the next steps. Now stick your card scraper in a vise, either your workbench vise or a metal vise. Just make sure it's firm in there. And then I use the jointer at the 90-degree angle, and I just run the file over it 2 or 3 times until I can feel it cutting the whole length. And then I flip it over and do the same thing to the other side. So after soaking the stones, I put the 1,000 grit stone on my workbench with a garbage bag underneath, plastic garbage bag to keep my workbench dry. And then I'm going to be removing the burrs created from jointing the edges. I'm going to go about 10 times per side, about a 1/2 inch on the stone, flip it over, and I'm keeping my fingers flat on here to flatten this. I want to flatten all those burrs. And then over here, 10 times, and then here 10 times or so. Then I'm going to flip it up on edge, and I'm not going to be running it along this way. I'm going to skew it a little bit so it doesn't put a deep groove right down the middle of my stone. And I'm going to try to keep it straight up if I can, and go 1, 2, 3, something like that. 1, 2, 3. Then swap out the stones. Take the coarser 1,000 grit stone and replace it with a finer 4,000 grit stone. And you could take this all the way up to 8,000 grit, but I haven't found it necessary. And I'm going to repeat this. Some card scraper manufacturers will sell theirs with a prepared edge, but you don't need to worry about that because that's what you're doing right here. Flip it over. Keep it nice and straight. But then on this time, I'm going to go again. Just to make sure it's absolutely smooth and the burrs are gone. And then maybe just one last little swipe to make sure that it's fully prepared. Now that the card scrapers have been dried off with a paper towel, I'm just going to take this burnisher and harden the edges here, running about 2 or 3 times up and down the edge while keeping it flat on the board. So all four corners got a hardening there. Now you can feel it and just make sure there's no burr or anything. It should feel completely smooth on all four of these sides. Now that the edges are hardened, just move the card scraper off about 1/4 of an inch off the edge of the board and hold this flat with your left hand. And like earlier, what I showed you, bring the burnisher straight up, back here at the back, and then tilt it just a couple degrees and push along. So what you want to do is feel for the burrs. If you don't feel the burr in a certain spot, then you want to push again, especially in that part. I feel the burr stronger right here, but not so much here and here. I'm going to give it a little extra push there, a little extra push there, and then one more. You don't want to go too far, you'll turn the burr hook all the way over. Okay, I'm feeling it most of the way, but not right here so much. And this is where a lot of the other tutorials fail, is they don't tell you to go by feel, and so you end up doing everything, all their steps, and then it doesn't cut shavings. So that's the really important step that I want to emphasize, is to go by feel. And I'm repeating this on the other side. And then I'm going to feel, just taking my fingernail, feeling if it catches. It's catching all the way along until I get here, then it's not catching. So I'm going to especially focus right there. Almost there. Yeah. So then flip it around and do the same thing on these other two sides. If you look really closely, which you may not be able to see, it's cutting my fingernail on the areas where there's actually a burr. Good. And then last one. All right, I feel hooks on every one of them. So next step, we're going to test it again. So now, this was not cutting before, now it's cutting. Nice shavings. So I'm going to test all four. And if there's a side that doesn't cut well, just go back to that one and keep turning the burr a little bit. Oh, I can feel this nice and sharp. And I'm going to do this to the rest of these car scrapers. This is Joshua Farnsworth. If you're interested in learning traditional woodworking with hand tools, visit my website at woodandshop.com. where you can find free video tutorials, workshop tours of amazing traditional woodworkers, and tool buying guides. You can ask questions and share your projects with thousands of woodworkers on my free traditional woodworking forum. Make sure you subscribe to my regular blog posts, and also check out my 10 steps for getting started in traditional woodworking. Enjoy!